He was running from 3 mafia families. He had $60, a fake name, a split sole on his left sneaker, and an 8-month-old baby that powerful men across the West Coast would burn everything down to get back. He did not need a stranger. He did not have time for a stranger. And then the train jolted, and his head landed on the shoulder of the one man on Earth more dangerous than the people hunting him. What happened next cost both of them everything they thought they knew about themselves. One exhausted Omega, one billionaire with blood on his hands and an empire built in the dark. One baby that smiled at a criminal like he already knew him. This is the story of what happens when the most desperate person in the room turns out to be the only one telling the truth. And what happens when the most powerful man in the room finds out that someone used him to build a child, and never told him. Some things cannot be undone. Some things were never meant to be. And some things, the kind that start on a train at 3 in the afternoon with a baby and a stranger and no plan, turn out to be the only real thing either of them ever had. This is their story. That's the full story hook. It does 5 things at once. It opens on Kaelion's desperation. Stakes immediate, visual, physical. The split soul. The $60. The baby. All of it lands in seconds. It drops the irony. The most dangerous man on the West Coast is the accidental shelter. It introduces Nico as the emotional center without explaining him. The baby who smiled at a criminal like he already knew him is the line that makes people stay. It plants both betrayals, Kaelion's survival secret and Rivian's DNA discovery, without spoiling either. And it closes on the tone the whole story earns. Not just action, not just romance. Something real. Chapter 1, the train, the baby, and the stranger nobody dared to look at. Everyone on that train thought the exhausted Omega leaning on the billionaire stranger was reckless. But nobody realized the terrifying Alpha sitting beside him controlled half the criminal networks on the West Coast. And almost no one understood that the baby sleeping between them was the reason 3 mafia families were hunting that very train. Almost. The Northern California Express cut through the late afternoon like a blade through silk. Outside the windows, golden hills rolled past in slow burning blurs. The kind of gold that only shows up in October, when the California light gets low and wide and makes everything look like it's about to be set on fire. Inside, the train car smelled like recycled air, expensive cologne, and something softer. Something that didn't belong. Baby powder. And rain. Hi viewers. Have you ever been so tired you forgot what safe even felt like? Kaelion Dorsey was 28 years old and he hadn't slept in 47 hours. Not because he couldn't, because he was afraid. His name meant nothing to most people. He should have stayed that way. But 3 weeks ago, he stopped being a nobody and became the most wanted Omega on the West Coast. And right now he was sitting in car 7 of this long-distance train, holding an 8-month-old baby against his chest, watching every face that moved through the aisle like each one might be the last thing he ever saw. Nico slept. That baby slept through everything. Through the running, through the freezing nights, through the motel rooms where Kaelion pressed towels under the door and sat with his back against the wall until sunrise. Nico just slept, small and warm and completely unaware that his very existence had turned the world into a hunting ground. Kaelion envied him. His own clothes were worn at the elbows. The jacket he wore used to be gray. Now it was something in between gray and tired. His sneakers had a split forming along the left sole, which meant every other step made a faint sound like a whisper he couldn't stop. He'd been meaning to fix that for 2 weeks. He hadn't had 2 free minutes. His hair was too long, getting into his eyes every time he looked down at the baby, and he kept pushing it back with the heel of his hand, a habit he'd developed over the last 3 weeks of not having time to do anything about anything. Around him, other passengers sat in business clothes, sharp blazers, polished shoes, women with silk scarves and men tapping away on expensive laptops. They glanced at him exactly once each, registered the baby, registered the jacket, registered the split in the sneaker sole and looked away. That was fine with Kaelion. He needed to be invisible. He'd bought the ticket with cash he'd taken from a withdrawal 200 miles back. He'd given the conductor a name that wasn't his. He'd chosen the window seat not because he liked views, but because it meant only one side of him was exposed to the aisle. He'd positioned Nico so the baby's face was mostly hidden from anyone walking through, just in case someone in this car had been sent to look. Every decision he'd made for 23 days had been a variation on the same calculation. How do I make us harder to see? He pulled Nico closer and let his head fall back against the headrest, blinking hard against the heaviness behind his eyes. Just stay awake. Just a few more hours. Sacramento. Then the bus north. Then the safe house. Just a few more. The train jolted. Not a track bump. Something sharp. Like the whole car shuddered sideways for half a second. Like the rails beneath them had decided to disagree with each other. Kaelion's body gave out. His head dropped. And his temple landed directly on someone's shoulder. He jerked awake instantly. Or tried to. His body refused to cooperate because the shoulder was solid and warm and it smelled like cedar and something older, darker, the kind of scent that doesn't come from a bottle. It comes from something inside a person. Something built into them the way grain is built into wood. And Kaelion's omega instincts registered it before his brain did, some old animal part of him recognizing the signal and going very still in response. Alpha. Dominant. Settled. The specific kind of calm that isn't peace. It's a decision. It's a person who has already decided what they will and won't do, and those decisions have been tested enough times that the calm is permanent now. Kaelion forced his eyes open. The man he'd collapsed onto didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even glance down. He was in a black button-down shirt, collar open at the top, no tie, no jewelry except for a single watch on his left wrist that looked like it cost more than most cars. Dark hair that had been cut expensive and grown out just past the point of intentional, not messy, just settled. Strong jaw. Eyes that were focused on something beyond the window, some private thought that the rest of the world wasn't invited into. His hands rested loose on his thighs, long fingers slightly open, not clenched. No phone, no laptop, no newspaper, just still. Kaelion estimated him at mid-30s. Built like someone who trained because they had to, not because they wanted to. Broad through the shoulders in the way that doesn't come from a gym, the kind of broad that comes from carrying weight and making decisions in rooms where the wrong answer gets people hurt. He took up space not by spreading out but simply by existing. Like gravity worked differently around him. Like the air in his immediate vicinity had agreed to defer. Other passengers were looking, not at Kaelion, but the man. They were doing it carefully, the way people look at something they don't want to admit they're afraid of. Quick glances, sideways cuts of the eyes, turns back to their screens that happened a fraction of a second too fast. A woman 3 rows ahead had her phone out, but the screen was dark and she hadn't noticed. A man in a business suit near the aisle had shifted both feet under his seat, pulling in, making himself smaller without knowing he was doing it. Kaelion should have pulled away. He absolutely should have. But sometimes exhaustion is not about sleep. Sometimes it's about carrying fear for so long that your body makes the decision for you. Sometimes it's about 47 hours of watching every door and every face and every car on every road, and your muscles just stop cooperating, and the warm, solid thing beside you stops being a stranger and starts being the only thing in your immediate world that isn't running away from something. He stayed. Not because he decided to, because he had nothing left to decide with. He closed his eyes again, and slept for the first time in 2 days. He didn't know how long it was before Nico moved. The baby woke up the way he always did, quiet and curious, blinking himself into the present like he was resuming a project. He looked at Kaelion, registered the sleep, and began the business of not being held anymore. He pushed with his feet, which was Nico's standard opening. Then he grabbed and pulled at Kaelion's collar, which was the escalation. When neither of these produced results, he turned his attention sideways. He found the warm, solid presence of the stranger beside Kaelion. He reached out, grabbed the black shirt with one small fist, and with the fearless logic of a child who has never once in his 8 months of life been in any danger he was aware of, Nico pulled himself forward and began to climb. Passengers noticed. The woman 3 rows ahead made a sound. Soft. Involuntary, like the small gasp that escapes when something happens faster than your reaction time. Because the baby was now sitting upright on the chest of the most quietly frightening man in the car, and the man hadn't reacted. He was looking down at the child. Not alarmed. Not confused. Not moving to remove him. Just looking. His expression hadn't changed. Not exactly. But something in his eyes had shifted slightly, some interior adjustment happening behind the still surface, the way a very deep river moves differently from what you see at the top. He placed one hand against Nico's back. Large, careful, steady, so the baby wouldn't fall. Nico looked up at him with those round, unguarded eyes, and smiled. Not a cautious smile, not a polite one, the wide-open kind. The kind that happens before a child learns that the world has edges. The kind that means, I see you, and I'm not afraid. The man blinked once. That was the only tell. One slow blink, and then the stillness came back. But the hand on Nico's back adjusted, settled, became less holding and more cradling. The difference between catching something and keeping it safe. 3 rows back, the businessman typed faster than he had been before. 2 rows ahead, the woman found something very interesting to look at outside the window on the other side of the car. Nobody in that car said a word. Kaelion woke up 6 minutes later. He felt the absence of weight before he registered anything else. His arms moved on instinct, reaching for Nico, finding nothing, and his eyes opened with the kind of speed that only happens when your body has spent 3 weeks in a threat state. His son was sitting on a stranger's chest. His blood went cold, down to the base of the spine, the kind of cold that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to motion. He was on his feet before he'd finished a single coherent idea. Hands reaching forward, voice already out of his mouth before he could measure it. "You stole my baby," came out louder than he meant. The whole car went quiet. The man looked up at him, steady, unhurried, the way a mountain is unhurried. "No," the man said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that had never once needed to raise itself, because the room always went quiet on its own. "Your baby stole me." Kaelion stood there. The baby, delighted by the sudden audience, made a noise that was exactly halfway between a giggle and a demand, and reached back toward Kaelion with both arms. Kaelion took him, held him hard against his chest. His heart was still running. "Don't," he started. Stopped. Tried again. "Don't touch him." The man's eyes moved over him once. Not unkind. Not warm either. The look of someone reading a situation, not judging it. "You were asleep," the man said simply. He was moving toward the edge. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just the fact, offered flat and clean like a sentence that had no interest in being anything more than true. Kaelion pulled Nico tighter and sat back down because his legs still weren't entirely his. He kept his eyes forward. The man had already looked away, back to that window and whatever internal geography he kept returning to. The car settled back into its traveling quiet. But now Kaelion was paying attention to things he'd been too exhausted to notice before. He looked at the passengers again. Not the way he'd been looking, cataloging for threat. He looked at the way they held themselves relative to this man. The 2-seat gap on the stranger's left, despite the car being nearly 3/4 full. The aisle adjustments. The way people walking through slightly widened their path around his row. The woman who had looked back twice and then firmly decided not to. They weren't just uncomfortable. They were afraid of him. Not mildly unsettled the way people get around someone who looks intense or unfriendly. Actively, carefully, quietly afraid, the way people are afraid of something they know is real. Kaelion had spent 3 weeks running from men who carried weapons and operated in organized groups and answered to a council with unlimited resources. He knew what real looked like. The man beside him was real. The train started slowing. Not a station slow. No announcement. The brakes engaged too hard, too sudden, the kind of deceleration that is a decision and not a schedule. The overhead lights flickered once. Someone's bag slid off a rack. Kaelion looked out the window. Black SUVs on the service road running parallel to the tracks. 3 of them, moving at train speed, keeping pace. Patient the way things are patient when they already know how the ending goes. His stomach went hollow. "They found me," he whispered. just the words escaping before he could catch them. Not directed at anyone, just the truth releasing itself into the air. But the man beside him heard. He didn't react to the vehicles outside. He'd already seen them. His eyes had moved to the connecting door at the front of the car, then to the one at the back, then across the passengers with the kind of assessment that doesn't need long because it's been done 10,000 times before and the brain has a shortcut for it now. Kaelion was calculating. He could move to the next car. He could try to hide Nico in a bathroom. He could. The connecting door opened. 2 men first, then a third. Then, for more fanning wide from the back entry simultaneously, the two-sided approach, the kind that closes off retreat before the target realizes there's nowhere to go. Black clothes, earpieces, the flat-faced controlled way they moved that said professionally trained and professionally paid. Passengers went rigid. It happened all at once, the whole car tightening like a single held breath. The leader came through the front door last. He moved down the center aisle with the specific unhurried energy of someone who has already decided the outcome. "Search every car," he said to the men behind him. Not loudly, the way you give instructions when you know they'll be followed. "The Omega and the child are here." Kaelion stopped breathing. Every hair on the back of his neck stood. Nico, picking up something from the air even in his sleepiness, made a small, uncertain sound. The man in the black shirt stood up. Slowly. He hadn't reached for anything. He just stood, with the same economy of motion he'd applied to everything else. Deliberate. Specific. Complete. He turned back to Kaelion. "Stay behind me," he said. One sentence. The same tone he'd used to say, "Your baby stole me." Zero urgency. Zero alarm. Like this was the most ordinary thing in the world, and the outcome had already been settled, and what remained was just the sequence of events catching up. Kaelion's arms pulled Nico in tight. The baby looked at the stranger and reached for him again. At the front of the car, the leader's eyes moved down the rows, passenger by passenger, scanning and discarding, until they landed on Kaelion, then slid left, to the man standing in front of him, and stopped. The leader's hand, the one that had been moving toward his jacket with the automatic ease of long habit, went completely still. And in the few seconds of silence that followed, the whole car understood that something had changed. The math had shifted. The air had a different calculation in it now, and nobody in that train car knew what came next. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, the name that silenced a gun car. The soldiers stopped moving the moment they saw him. Not all at once. One by one, like power cutting out in sections of a building. First, the man closest to the front door went rigid and still. Then the pair near the center aisle. Then the 2 flanking the back. Each one froze in sequence, like they were receiving the same silent signal transmitted through the air between them, something below the level of language, something that moved through trained bodies the way cold moves through water. The leader's hand never reached his jacket. Kaelion stood behind the man in the black shirt and watched all of this happen and understood none of it except for the outcome. He pressed Nico tighter against his chest. The baby was alert now, picking up on the silence the way babies do, that animal sensitivity that hasn't been socialized out of them yet. The passengers had gone completely silent. Not the polite quiet of people trying not to eavesdrop. The cold stillness of people who've understood that what happens in the next 60 seconds has everything and nothing to do with them. The businessman had closed his laptop. The woman with the silk scarf had both hands flat on her thighs like she was bracing for impact. The man hadn't moved. He just stood there between Kaelion and the soldiers like he was waiting for someone to come to a decision. Kaelion leaned forward slightly and dropped his voice to nothing. "You don't understand. They'll kill you too." A sound came from the man that might have been amusement. Low and short, the way a person laughs at something they've heard many times and no longer finds surprising. "They're welcome to try," he said. The leader started moving again. Slower this time. Professional. Practiced. The choreography of people who had done this before. Fear has a smell. Right then, that train car was saturated with it. The leader stopped 3 feet away. His eyes went over the man in the black shirt once. Not the dismissive scan from before, but a real look, the kind where you're trying to place someone. where you're checking a face against a mental catalog and not yet finding the match but knowing you're close. Then, deliberately, he moved past him to Kaelion. That was the first mistake. He made it because he'd spent his whole career dealing with omegas who backed down when the power was applied directly. He was expecting compliance. He was expecting the calculation to go the way it always went. "There you are," the leader said. His voice carried the specific quality of someone who enjoys the moment before resolution. The pause before the answer. The second before control is fully transferred. "You've been very hard to track down, Kaelion." The use of his actual name hit like cold water. Kaelion said nothing. He kept his face still the way he'd learned to in 3 weeks of running. Give nothing away. Give them no texture to grab onto. "You should have stayed where you were," the leader continued. "You were comfortable. Federal. You had a room to yourself. You had support." He tilted his head slightly, the performance of reasonableness. "Whatever you think you saw in that facility, whatever you think you know, you didn't have the full picture." "I had a picture that was complete enough," Kaelion said quietly. The leader's expression tightened, just at the corners. "And what did running get you? 3 weeks of motels and no sleep and a baby who deserves better than this." His eyes moved to Nico, and Kaelion saw the assessment in them, clinical and precise, the look of someone checking the condition of an asset. "Come back. We'll work something out. Nobody needs to make this harder than it is." "You sent armed men onto a passenger train," Kaelion said. "We sent people to find you safely." The word safely landed wrong. It landed the way all the soft words from people like this landed, hollowed out, the meaning removed, the shape of it kept. "Let's go," the leader said. His voice shifted. The performance was over. "Stand up. Both of you are coming off at the next stop." He stepped forward and grabbed Kaelion's arm. Not rough at first. The specific kind of grip that communicates ownership before it communicates force. Designed to move a person the way you move furniture, without anger, without effort, just the quiet demonstration that you're the one making the decisions here. Kaelion pulled back. He twisted his body sideways to keep Nico away from the man's reach, which put the baby behind him, which meant Kaelion's back was toward the aisle, which was the opening the flanking soldier had been waiting for. The man came in from the left and reached for Nico. His hand closed around the baby's arm. Nico felt it. The grip was too tight, and it was wrong in a way the baby's body understood before Kaelion could do anything. The small face crumpled instantly, the way Nico's face always crumpled before the crying started, that sequence of collapse happening in real time. "Don't you touch him." Kaelion was fighting both directions at once, the leader's grip on his arm and the soldier reaching for his son, and he was losing both of them simultaneously, and the crying started, sharp and high and real, the sound of a small person who has finally found something frightening. The man in the black shirt moved. It still wasn't fast. That was the thing nobody present would be able to properly explain later when they tried to describe what they'd seen. He didn't rush. He didn't lunge. He reached out and placed his hand around the soldier's wrist. One hand, completely calm, the way you stop a door swinging shut. The soldier froze. Total. Absolute. Every muscle in his body stopped as if the signal from his brain had been interrupted at the source. His grip on Nico released not because he chose to release it but because the choice had been removed from him entirely. The car went silent except for Nico crying. The leader turned. And for the first time he really looked at the man beside Kaelion. Not the processing glance, not the dismissal. He looked the way you look when the file in your head finally opens and you find the right name and the blood drains out of your face and you understand that you have made a significant error. The soldier's hand dropped away from Nico entirely. Kaelion pulled his son in and pressed the baby's face into his chest and shook. The leader's voice came out changed. Careful. Low. All the performance gone. What was left underneath was just a man trying very hard to navigate something he had not prepared for. Alpha Cade. 2 words. The name landed in that car like something dropped from a height, like a sound that changed the pressure of the room. Kaelion had no idea what those 2 words meant, but everyone else did. Even the passengers who had been staring at their laps. Even the ones who had been making every effort to not be present in this situation. They heard that name and the energy in the car reorganized itself completely, every person recalibrating their understanding of who was standing in front of them and what that meant. Rivian Cade didn't respond to his name being said. He released the soldier's wrist with the same deliberate ease he'd used to take it, like returning something borrowed, like the gesture had already served its purpose. He said, "You're scaring the child." That was all. Just that. And the soldier stepped back 2 full steps without being told to. The leader's hand, which had been moving again toward his jacket, that automatic reach for the authority he'd built his whole career around, went completely still a second time. He stood. Nobody moved. Rivian Cade looked at the leader with an expression that had not changed once through the entire encounter. No anger. No calculation that you could see. No threat displayed. Just that settled, granite calm that communicates something that words aren't built to carry. The thing it communicated was, "I have already decided. You are still catching up." The seconds stretched. 2 passengers in the first row had pressed themselves against the window side of their seats. A woman with a toddler of her own had turned the child to face her chest the same way Kaelion held Nico, instinct activating instinct. The leader made a decision. It was in his posture before it was in his words. The slight drop of the shoulders. The breath drawn and released. The particular way a person looks when they've decided that the account isn't worth what it would cost to collect it today. "Remove your men from this car," Rivian said. Not loud. Not commanding. Like a fact being stated to someone who already knew it. The leader held for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds was longer than most people would have managed. Kaelion was counting without meaning to. Then the leader gave the signal, 1 flat gesture of the hand, and his men began moving toward the back door. Not running. Not scrambling. Moving with the specific measured pace of professionals who've been given a clean exit and understand the difference between that and what comes next if they don't take it. They filed out. The leader was last. He paused at the door and looked back at Kaelion 1 final time. Not at Rivian. At Kaelion specifically. And in that look was a message meant only for him. Said, "This doesn't end here." Said, "We will find a way around whatever this was." Said, "The child is still ours." Then he was gone. The door closed. The car exhaled. Not all at once. In pieces. A ripple of breath released moving down the aisle like a wave, person by person. Some small restoration of atmosphere happening row by row. Someone made a sound in their throat that wanted to be relief and didn't quite get there. The businessman opened his laptop again but didn't type. Kaelion sat down. His legs had made the decision for him and he was grateful for it because he wasn't sure he had the authority to make it himself. Nico was still crying, the hiccuping soft aftermath kind, the crying that happens when the acute thing is over and the body is still processing. Kaelion rubbed circles on his back, small automatic circles, the motion his hands had learned over 8 months of being the only comfort available. "I know," Kaelion murmured to him. "I know. It's okay. I know. It wasn't okay. But you say it anyway." Rivian sat back down beside him. He didn't speak right away. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small flat tin. He set it on the fold-down tray between them without comment. Just placed it there like something to look at when looking at things is all you can do. "Breathe," he said. Just that. Kaelion breathed. Long and slow. The kind of breath that shakes on the way in if you're not careful. He was careful. Outside the window, the black SUVs had fallen back. Gone from the service road or disappeared behind terrain. The train was picking up speed again. Resuming its pace, the world outside beginning to move the way it was supposed to. Inside, Nico's sobs had slowed. Stopped. The baby gripped Kaelion's collar and went heavy against his chest with the dense, satisfied weight of a child who has cried through something and come out the other side. The car was going back to its ordinary sounds. The ambient noise of people politely pretending nothing had happened. The gentle percussion of miles. Kaelion stared at the mint tin on the tray. He was doing math. The kind of math that happens when your adrenaline is draining out and leaving room for thought again. He was running the variables. This man. The name the soldiers said. The way they stopped. The way the leader left. The 2-seat gap in a full car. the passengers who had been afraid before the soldiers even arrived. He turned his head and looked at the man beside him. Rivian was looking out the window again, that same private distance in his eyes. Like the scene that had just occurred was a minor weather event that had passed and he had already returned to his actual thinking. "Who are you?" Kaelion asked. Rivian's eyes moved to him, level, reading him the way he'd read the car before. "Wang. Someone who happens to be on your train," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," Rivian agreed. "It isn't." Kaelion didn't look away. "Those men knew your name. All of them. Immediately. No response. They were armed and they walked off this train the second you told them to. Still nothing. Just that level gaze. Are you more dangerous than the people who were just on this train?" Kaelion asked. Rivian considered this with the same economy he applied to everything. A brief private calculation. "Considerably," he said. Kaelion held on that for a long moment. The honest answer. No performance around it, no softening. Just the word offered clean. He should have gotten up. He knew he should have. He should have taken Nico and moved to the next car and ridden out the last hours to Sacramento and found a different route and put as much distance as possible between himself and everything in this car, including this man. He stayed. Because somewhere in the math of the last 20 minutes, the calculation had shifted. Running from this man had started to feel less safe than staying beside him. Not because Rivian was safe, but because the things hunting Kaelion weren't safe either, and at least he could see this one. At least this one had put himself between Kaelion and a gun. "Why?" Rivian said. "Are 3 mafia families chasing 1 Omega and a baby?" Kaelion looked down at Nico. The baby had found the edge of Kaelion's collar and was working it between his fingers. That soothing, repetitive motion he did when he was settling into calm. His eyes were half closed. Kaelion's throat tightened. He kept his voice low. "Because the baby belongs to them," he said. The train rolled on through the fading afternoon. Rivian said nothing, but his eyes moved to the baby, and something in his face did a thing that didn't match the rest of him. A weight arriving in the wrong place. A word that wasn't ready showing up early. He looked at Nico for a long moment. The baby, unaware of any of it, kept working the collar. Then Rivian looked back at the window and stayed quiet in a way that was different from before. Not the stillness of a man thinking about something external. The stillness of a man thinking about something he just discovered inside himself. Chapter 3. Chapter 3, the scent that changed everything. The soldiers didn't come back. 40 minutes passed. The train moved through 2 tunnels and a long curve and a stretch of open range where the sky got wide and red at the edges and the shadows from the hills reached all the way to the track. Nobody came through the connecting doors. Nobody stood in the aisle too long. The danger didn't return. That should have felt like relief. Didn't. Kaelion knew this pattern the way he knew the sound of Nico's different cries. This wasn't retreat. This was reassembly. The leader would call ahead. There would be people at Sacramento or at the stop before it, or waiting at the end of the line with a different set of instructions. The kind that started with secure the child and ended with whatever needed to happen next. He needed to get off this train. The rail junction at Ridgewood was 30 minutes out. Small stop. No platform attendant after dark. He'd scouted it on his phone map 2 days ago, tagged it as a possibility. Now it was the only possibility he had. The train began slowing as it approached. Kaelion stood up. He had Nico on his hip and his bag on his shoulder, and his whole survival had narrowed to those 2 things plus the door at the end of the car. He was already mapping the exit. The platform. The service road that ran east behind the junction building. He'd walked this route in his head before. He could do it. "Sit down," Rivian said. Not loudly. Not with command. Just said, "The way you state a fact about weather." Kaelion stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. He stood in the aisle with Nico on his hip and looked down at the man who had no authority over him and no reason to give him direction, and who hadn't offered a single explanation of himself except for one word. Considerably. "I have to go," Kaelion said. "I know." Rivian looked up at him with that level, measuring gaze. "Running again won't solve it. I wasn't asking your opinion. No, Rivian said. You were moving toward the door, which tells me you don't have a plan for what happens when they're already on that platform. Kaelion's jaw went tight, because they would be. He looked at the window. The service road beside the tracks was empty, which meant either nobody was coming, or someone had already figured out that Ridgewood was where he'd try to get off and had placed people on the far side of the platform building where you couldn't see them from the train window until the doors opened. He sat back down. Nico had been watching the whole exchange with the wide-focused look he got when he was trying to understand something and couldn't. He turned on Kaelion's hip, that restless full-body twist, and reached out toward Rivian with both arms spread wide. He does this, Kaelion said. The words came out flatter than he meant. I know, Rivian said. He did it before. He held out his hands. Open, patient, no demand in it. Kaelion hesitated exactly 1 second, which was 1 second more than Nico had any interest in waiting, then transferred the baby. Rivian took him with the same specificity he applied to everything. One arm positioned under, one hand supporting the back of the neck on instinct, the baby settled into the cradle of his forearm like water finding its level. Not the hold of someone trying to be careful with something unfamiliar. The hold of someone whose body remembered it. Nico settled immediately. Total body relaxation. The full weight sag. The slackening of everything held tense. He looked up at the underside of Rivian's jaw, considered it with great seriousness, and then grabbed the black collar of his shirt in both fists and pulled. He does that to everyone, Kaelion said. No, Rivian said quietly, looking down at the baby. He doesn't. Kaelion watched. He watched the way Rivian held Nico. Not the watching of someone suspicious or protective, though he was both of those things too. The watching of someone trying to understand something they hadn't expected. Rivian didn't perform anything with the baby. He didn't make the soft noises adults make when they want children to find them charming. He just held him the way he held everything. Still, attentive, present, and Nico was at rest. The most alive, most reactive, most loudly opinionated 8-month-old Kaelion had ever encountered was lying against this man's arm like he'd found the one quiet place in the world. Children don't fear power. They fear intentions. Outside the windows, Ridgewood came and went. The junction buildings. The empty platform. The service road. Kaelion watched it pass and said nothing. Rivian had known they weren't stopping there. He'd known before Kaelion stood up. Which meant he'd been watching the same road and running the same math and arrived at the same conclusion about what waited on the other side of that platform building. Kaelion filed that away with everything else he was filing. You knew, he said. Rivian didn't answer. He handed Nico back with the same deliberate care he'd used for everything in the last hour. The transition happened smoothly, Nico transferring without complaint, turning to nose into Kaelion's neck. Kaelion settled the baby against his chest. Nico made one small sound of mild objection, then went quiet. They're going to come back, Kaelion said. Yes. And you're still going to be here when they do. Yes. Why? Rivian looked at the window. The hills had gone from red to dark purple. The last of the light was leaving the top edges of things, that final withdrawal before the sky went full dark. Because I have questions, he said. About me. About the baby. Kaelion's arms tightened around Nico without thinking. The automatic response. The body doing what 3 weeks of running had trained it to do. The baby is mine, he said. The words came out harder than he'd intended. More defended. More raw. Rivian turned to look at him at that. A real look. Not assessing this time. Something else. Something that was working carefully to remain neutral. I didn't say he wasn't, he said. The train passed through another tunnel. 30 seconds of darkness and enclosed noise. The roar of the track surrounding them on all sides. In the window glass across the aisle Kaelion caught their reflections. Himself with Nico, the man beside them, the three of them lit by the car's interior lights, framed together in the dark glass like something composed, like an image that meant something more than its parts. Then the tunnel ended and the outside came back, and the reflection dissolved. Kaelion kept his eyes forward. His voice stayed low. What do you know about the Veltrin Institute? A pause. Brief. Almost imperceptible. But there. Private research facility, Rivian said. Omega Genetics. Western California operation. A beat. It's been on my radar for about 18 months. Why? Because things operating in my territory go on my radar. Kaelion absorbed that without asking what territory meant in this context, because they both understood he already knew. He kept his eyes on the seat back in front of him, the dull upholstery, something neutral to look at while he said the next part. They weren't just researching genetics, he said. That's what they told the funding councils, what they told the university partnerships, what they told the state licensing board. He stopped, started again more carefully. They were running a program called the Cohort Initiative, hybrid air selection. They had a database of Omega genetic profiles, some voluntary, some not, and a separate archive of alpha donor samples they'd collected through what were listed as clinical studies or anonymous registries. Rivian's stillness had a different quality to it now. Not the settled quiet from before, the stillness of someone paying very close attention and keeping very quiet about it. They told the alpha donors the archive was passive, Kaelion continued. Just a record, nothing active. Nobody would use those samples without consent. He paused on the last word, felt what it weighed. The program had been running active for 4 years without notifying any of the donors. They'd generated 17 live births, tracked each one, monitored development through a network of cooperating care providers who reported back to the facility without the parents' knowledge. 17 children, Rivian said. 17 that I know of. The silence stretched. I worked in the facility for 2 years, Kaelion said. Data management, records processing. I wasn't lab adjacent. I wasn't in the genetics division. I processed intake files, updated records, archived reports. I wasn't supposed to see the cohort files. They were stored in a partition section of the system that required secondary clearance. He stopped. And then one Tuesday night I was running a system audit and the partition failed and every file in the cohort archive came through to my screen. He didn't say what he'd seen in those files. Not in detail. Not yet. He'd spent 3 weeks carrying the detail of it, and he wasn't ready to put it into a stranger's hands. I found Nico's file, he said instead, and I found out what he was. Rivian waited. Outside, a town passed by in a string of lit windows. Houses, gas stations, a school with a parking lot emptied for the night. The small evidence of ordinary life continuing in the dark on the other side of the glass. The 3 families that fund the Veltrin Institute, Kaelion said, have been at war for a long time. Not open war. The political, financial, resource control kind. Each family has lost lineage in the last 2 generations. Failed heirs. Bloodline conflicts. None of them strong enough to claim full dominance over the network, but none of them weak enough to be removed. He looked down at Nico. The baby was almost asleep again, his weight going heavy. They needed a 3rd-generation alpha who could serve as a unification heir. Someone with genetic markers that satisfied the legacy criteria of all 3 families simultaneously. No one family winning. One heir who belonged to all of them. He could feel Rivian processing beside him. Not visibly, just the quality of the air between them, the specific atmosphere of a very organized mind receiving information and filing it. Nico carries the markers, Kaelion said. His profile came back as a 91% match for unified succession. The probability trees they ran said he was the most viable heir the program had produced. Out of 17 births. He paused. They were going to take him at age 3, move him into council custody, raise him inside the compound system. He would never have known what he was built for. He would have become exactly what they needed. His voice had stayed steady through all of it. That was how he knew he'd said it too many times. When something stops breaking your voice, it's because you've had to say it enough times that the pain moved somewhere else. Somewhere below language. I found the file on a Tuesday, he said. And you were gone by Thursday, Rivian said. Not a question. Just the thing completing itself. Yeah. He'd left with Nico and one bag and $60 and a name he'd been given by someone who helped runaways. An Omega woman named Dara who ran an underground network for people in situations like his, who had given him 3 burner phones and a list of safe houses and a route that avoided every major transit hub with facial recognition. He hadn't heard from Dara in 12 days. He tried not to think about why. Nico isn't just a child, Kaelion said quietly. He's physical evidence. The only proof that exists outside the facility. His DNA carries markers that link him to the program, to the alpha donors they used without consent, to the methodology they used. His existence proves everything. Without him, they have documentation they can destroy and sources they can silence. With him, everything holds, Rivian said. Everything holds. The train moved on through the dark between towns. Kaelion's head fell back against the headrest. Not sleep, just the small surrender of the neck muscles, the letting go of the forward posture he'd been holding for 3 weeks. The bone-deep tired that lives underneath the running tired. The kind that waits. He hadn't meant to say all of that. It had come out like pressure finding its way through a crack that had been building for 3 weeks. Like the weight of the story had gotten too heavy to carry in silence next to someone who was going to find out half of it anyway. He closed his eyes. He felt the warmth shift. Nico's weight redistributed, the familiar small body reorganizing toward the nearest heat source. Kaelion let it go. His arms stayed loose around the baby, present but not gripping. He slept. Properly this time. Not the sideways crash of before. Actual sleep. The descent. Rivian sat very still. He held the baby, who had transferred in Kaelion's sleep with his usual easy certainty, and he looked at the dark countryside moving past the window, and he did not process the story about the Institute. He was processing something else. He'd noticed it the first time he held Nico, on the seat before the soldiers came. He'd noticed it and put it in the part of his mind labeled anomaly and left it there while everything else required attention. Now he took it out. The scent. Nico smelled like Kaelion. Baby powder and something clean and the specific warm smell of a child who has been held close and often. That was the surface of it. Expected. Normal. Underneath that, mixed into it in a way that would require an alpha with specific trained sensitivity to isolate, was something else. Nico smelled like him. Not similar. Not adjacent. Not the kind of overlap you get from 2 people who share a bloodline or a heritage or a general alpha genetic profile. Like him. His specific, individual base scent. The thing as unique as a fingerprint. The thing that cannot be taught or mimicked or approximated. The thing that is built into a person at the cellular level and announced itself through the skin and the breath and the warmth of a living body. That scent existed in this baby. In an 8-month-old child named Nico whose Omega Guardian had run from a genetics facility 3 weeks ago. Rivian looked at the baby's face. The smooth skin. The small jaw, soft in the way of babies but with something beneath the softness that would emerge in time. The brow line. The set of the eyes even in sleep. He had photographs in a private archive that he hadn't looked at in years. Early photographs. A boy of about 4, 7, 10. He'd seen those photographs enough times that the details were recorded somewhere he didn't have to consciously access. He was accessing them now. His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His head of security. A single line. No context. The kind of message Zion sent when the information was too significant for context, when it needed to arrive unmediated. He opened it. His security team had been running a background intercept on Veltron Institute communications. A watch flag from 18 months ago, low priority queue. Tonight, triggered by what had happened on the train and the subsequent ID confirmation on the soldiers, Zion had run a targeted cross-reference. Veltron's leaked data set against Rivian's own alpha signatory registration, on record with the Pacific and Northern Councils where he held board status. The analysis had taken 11 minutes. The message had one line. Probability of paternal match. 98.7%. Rivian read it. Read it again. Set the phone face down against his leg. He looked at the window. The glass showed him his own reflection overlaid on the dark outside. faint and colorless. He looked at himself looking. Then he looked at the baby. Nico's hand had opened in his sleep, the fingers spreading and then curling loosely, small and complete and perfectly made. That open hand rested against the front of Rivian's shirt directly over his chest. Rivian looked at that hand for a long time. Kaelion slept beside him, unaware. His breathing even now, slower than it had been all day, the defended posture finally released in unconsciousness. The train moved forward through the dark. And far ahead of it, on a lit platform at the Sacramento station, a phone rang. A woman answered it, listened, and said 4 words. "Are you absolutely certain?" The voice on the other end said, "We have confirmation. He's on the train. And he isn't alone." The woman at the platform looked down the length of the track, into the dark where the train was still an hour away. "Then we adjust," she said, and ended the call. Chapter 4. Chapter 4, The Mountain Pass and the First Thing He Ever Killed. The ambush didn't announce itself. That was the thing about real danger. It didn't give you a countdown. It didn't build a warning. 1 second the train was moving through the dark of the mountain pass, the iron walls of the Sierra Nevada rising on both sides like something the earth had pushed up on purpose, and the next second the front of the train made a sound like the world being torn in half and everything that was upright stopped being upright. Kaelion hit the seat back in front of him. He had Nico in his arms when it happened and his body did what 3 weeks of running had drilled into it. He wrapped around the baby before any other instinct fired. His shoulder took the impact. His knees hit the floor. He held on. The lights went out. 6 seconds of complete darkness and the screaming of metal and passengers screaming on top of that. Overlapping sounds that stripped the air clean of anything else. Then the emergency lighting came on, red-orange, filling the car with the color of something burning. Kaelion was on the floor between 2 rows of seats with Nico against his chest. The baby was crying. Hard and immediate, the real kind, the kind that comes from shock and noise and everything changing at once. "I know," Kaelion said into the top of his head. "I know. I've got you." The car had tilted. Not far. Maybe 8 degrees. But enough that everything loose had shifted to one side and the aisle was no longer level. Someone was bleeding near the front. He could see it in the emergency light, a woman pressing both hands to her forehead, her seatmate trying to hold her steady. He looked for Rivian. The man was already standing. He'd braced during impact, one hand locked around the overhead rack, and he'd come through it like a person who had rehearsed for this possibility. He was scanning the car, those organized eyes moving from window to window, front door to back door, processing the exterior through the tilted glass. "Explosion on the tracks," he said. Not loud, controlled, speaking to Kaelion specifically. "Forward car derailed. We're still attached, but the engine is stopped." "The council," Kaelion said. "Different faction." Rivian's jaw was tight for the first time since Kaelion had met him. Not afraid. Something else. The specific expression of a man who has made a mistake he already knows the name of. The Sacramento group wouldn't hit a moving train. Too visible. This is the Renner family. Kaelion didn't know the name, but the way Rivian said it told him enough. The back door of the car burst open. 3 men came through armed, moving low and fast, flashlights cutting through the emergency lighting. Behind them, through the broken window at the far end of the car, Kaelion could see more lights moving on the slope outside. People coming down from the high ground on both sides of the track. They'd planned this. The whole thing. The pass, the timing, the approach from elevation. This hadn't been assembled in the 4 hours since the soldiers on the train. This had been in motion before the train left the station. Someone had known Kaelion would be on this train before Kaelion knew it himself. He filed that fact into the part of his brain that kept the things he couldn't deal with right now and turned his attention to right now. Rivian moved. He went toward the armed men rather than away from them, which was the thing Kaelion's brain refused for a full second before accepting. He went forward into the space between them, and the first man made the mistake of leveling his weapon at center mass, which meant his attention was on Rivian's torso and not on Rivian's left hand, and the left hand had already cleared the distance and taken the gun before the first man finished the decision to shoot. It happened in under 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, and the first on one knee, his left hand braced against the floor, his right hand still holding the weapon he'd taken. He'd been hit in the upper left side. The black shirt was darker there, wet. The third man was raising his weapon again. Kaelion didn't think. His hand found the gun on the floor near the second man, the one who'd gone backward over the seat. His fingers closed around it and he came up out of the row and he fired. The recoil went through his whole arm. He'd never held a gun before in his life. He'd never fired one. He didn't miss. The third man dropped. The car went quiet except for the ongoing sound of passengers, muffled crying. Someone praying in a low, continuous voice. The baby still screaming against Kaelion's chest. Kaelion stood in the aisle with the gun in his hand and his ears ringing and his whole body vibrating at a frequency that didn't have a name yet. He was looking at the man on the floor and understanding what he'd done and feeling it arrive in layers, the first layer being functional and the layers beneath being something he was going to have to deal with later when there was a later. Survival doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply demands action. He went to Rivian. Rivian was still on one knee, breathing steady, doing what a person does when they've been shot before and know that panic is the second injury. He looked up at Kaelion. His eyes tracked clean. Alert. Through and through, he said. What? The bullet exited the back. No organ damage. It will hurt, but it won't kill me. Kaelion stared at him. You've been shot, Kaelion said, because someone needed to say it. Yes. Rivian looked at the gun in Kaelion's hand, then at the man on the floor, then back at Kaelion. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, like a thing he had expected to eventually find had arrived. First time, Rivian said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Kaelion said. Good shot. Don't, Kaelion said. More men outside. He could hear them, the sounds of approach from both slopes, coordinated, the second wave coming in now that the first hadn't reported back. He could see lights through the windows moving down through the scrub and rocks toward the track. He looked at the passengers. 15 people in this car alone. Some of them hurt, all of them terrified. 2 children. The woman with the bleeding forehead. An older man who had pressed himself into the corner by the emergency exit and had both hands over his face. He looked at Rivian. Rivian was using his own shirt to apply pressure to the wound. His face was controlled. Whatever the pain was doing, he was keeping it somewhere it couldn't slow him down. How many? Kaelion said. Outside? 12. Maybe 15. He glanced through the window at the slope lights. Renner sends enough to be certain. They're not here to kill us, Kaelion said. Rivian looked at him. The first group, Kaelion said. They had every shot. They took none of them. They were aiming low. Disabling, not lethal. They want the baby taken alive. Rivian was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said. So they'll come in numbers, but they'll be careful. They won't risk hitting Nico. Correct. Which means we have a window before the second wave reaches the car. Because they'll hold at the perimeter while they get eyes on the situation. Rivian looked at him with an expression that had several layers to it. The top layer was something very close to what other people called impressed. The layers beneath it were harder to name. There's an equipment access hatch, Rivian said. In the floor of the baggage car. 2 forward. It opens to the undercarriage. From there you can reach the slope on the north side before they've completed the ring. You've done this before. I know the train. Kaelion grabbed his bag from where it had fallen. He checked Nico. The baby was hiccuping post-cry, his face red and wet, his eyes fixed on Kaelion with an expression that said you need to fix this and fix it now. Kaelion pressed his mouth to the top of Nico's head for exactly 1 second. I know, he said. We're going. He looked at Rivian. The man had gotten to his feet. He was upright and steady, one hand still pressed to his side, the controlled breathing doing what it needed to do. He was functional. Barely, but functionally. Can you move? Kaelion asked. Rivian looked at him with the expression of a man who had been asked this question before and had always found it slightly beside the point. Move, he said. They went forward. The baggage car access hatch was exactly where Rivian said it would be. A recessed panel in the floor with a manual latch that hadn't been opened in so long that it took Rivian's full weight on the handle to break it free. It opened into the sound and cold of the track beneath the train, the undercarriage, the smell of hot metal and night air and the hillside. From below, pressed flat to the slope, the mountain pass spread out in all its enormous indifferent dark. Kaelion went first. He went down with Nico pressed to his chest, one-handed on the metal rungs, the gun from the car tucked into his waistband in a place he was deeply uncomfortable with but had no alternative for. Rivian came down behind him. He didn't make a sound. They moved north along the base of the train, staying in the shadow of the undercarriage, the lights from the second wave of Renner men visible on the slope above them maybe 200 yards out and moving down. They had maybe 4 minutes. They used all 4 of them. The north face of the pass had an old fire road carved into the rock, barely wide enough for a single vehicle, running east at a gradient that would come out above the tree line in about a mile. Rivian knew about it. Of course he did. He also knew about the vehicle parked at the fire road junction. One of his, a black truck, keys above the visor, communications gear in the rear console. Clean, fueled, ready, not staged in the last 4 hours. Staged before the train even departed, which meant before the soldiers boarded, which meant before anyone on that train had any reason to know this night would end on a mountain pass with a derailed engine and a slope full of armed men. Kaelion stood beside the truck and looked at Rivian and felt the entire architecture of the last few hours rearrange itself around a new center of gravity. Not just tonight, all of it. The seat on the train. The empty 2-seat gap in a 3/4 full car. The way Rivian had known Ridgewood wasn't safe before Kaelion stood up. The mountain pass. The fire road. The truck. None of it coincidence. None of it accident. "You knew I was on this train before you got on it," Kaelion said. The words came out flat. Not an accusation exactly. Just the thing completing itself in the air between them. The thing that had been present for hours finally stepping forward and saying its name. Rivian held his side. His breathing was controlled and deliberate, the specific rhythm of someone managing pain without showing it, a technique that required practice. He met Kaelion's eyes in the dark. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He held the eye contact with the same steadiness he applied to everything. Kaelion looked at him, at the wound, at the truck, at the mountain pass rising on both sides of them in the dark, the rocks and scrub enormous and indifferent, the stars sharp overhead at this elevation. He thought about Nico on the train, that first moment, the baby climbing onto a stranger's chest and settling there like he'd been waiting for it. The large, careful hand against the small back. The adjustment from holding to cradling. The thing that had happened in Rivian's face when the baby smiled at him. He thought about that for exactly as long as it took to understand what it meant. Then he thought about the 98.7% on the phone screen. And then he didn't think about either thing separately anymore. "Get in," Rivian said. "I'll explain what I can while we drive." The words were quiet. Not dismissive. Not withholding. The words of a man who understood that the explanation was owed and intended to pay it, but that paying it on a mountain pass with people closing the distance behind them was not the way. Kaelion looked at him for another second. Then he opened the door. He climbed in with Nico still pressed to his chest, and the baby stirred once, made a small exhausted sound of protest and went back under. Kaelion pressed his mouth to the top of his son's head. 1 second. Just that. 23 days of running. A train. A fight. A gun in his hand and a man on the floor and the specific permanent feeling of something that cannot be undone. Rivian's blood on a black shirt. A mountain pass at night. A truck that had been waiting. And now this. Behind them, from the direction of the derailed train, a sound rose up through the dark and the distance. Raised voices, the communication of the second wave finding what they'd left behind and beginning the calculation of what came next. Rivian started the engine. The fire road opened ahead of them, narrow and unlit, the headlights pushing just far enough into the dark to show the next 50 feet of ground. Nico, finally exhausted past the threshold of even his considerable resilience, slept against Kaelion's chest with the absolute boneless surrender of a child who has decided that the adults will sort out whatever this is. Kaelion looked out the windshield. Then he looked at the man driving. The controlled breathing. The wet shirt. The profile lit by the dashboard instruments, that jaw, that stillness, the hand on the wheel that had the same quality as everything else. Deliberate, specific, already decided. He understood something. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Everything he thought he was running from had just become the least complicated part of his situation. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. The Omega who walked into the council room. Rivian drove for 6 hours without stopping. East through the mountains, then south on roads that weren't on any commercial map, then through the edge of the Central Valley where the agriculture stretched out flat and enormous in the dark. The irrigation rigs lit up like industrial constellations. Kaelion slept for 2 of those hours in the passenger seat with Nico in his lap and the gun still in his waistband and the window cracked enough to keep the cold air coming in. When he woke up the second time, Rivian had his phone in his left hand and was speaking to someone in a voice low enough to be a murmur, the words just beneath the threshold of clarity. He ended the call when he saw Kaelion was awake. "Where are we going?" Kaelion said. "Safe house. Stockton adjacent. My people cleared it an hour ago." "Your people?" Rivian's eyes stayed on the road. "I have a team that handles logistics." "Is that what you call them?" A quiet sound from him. Not quite a laugh. "Among other things." Kaelion looked at the road for a minute. The flat dark of the valley floor. The smell of turned earth coming through the cracked window. Nico's weight on his lap. The baby's breathing even and slow. "You said you'd explain," Kaelion said. Rivian was quiet for long enough that Kaelion thought he was going to decline. Then, "I received intelligence about the Veltrin Institute 14 months ago. One of my analysts flagged it as a potential operation running inside my network's jurisdiction without authorization or notification, which is a protocol violation that I take seriously." "Authorization from you?" "From the council structure I operate through," Rivian said. "Private research of that scale, with the funding those families were moving, should have appeared on multiple registers. Didn't, which meant it was being actively hidden. So you were already watching them. We were building a file. We had the funding structure, the board names, the shell company chain. What we didn't have was proof of what they were actually doing inside the facility. We had inference. Nothing that would hold at council level." Kaelion looked at him. "And then I ran." "And then you ran," Rivian said. "And my intelligence network flagged an Omega fleeing with a child from a Veltrin-adjacent safe house in Fresno. And I had a meeting in San Francisco that I rescheduled. You were on that train because of me. I was on that train to understand what you had. A beat. I didn't know the rest of it until we were already moving. The rest of it." Kaelion turned that phrase over. The rest of it being the DNA match on Rivian's phone. The 98.7% that Rivian hadn't told him about yet. The thing that had shifted the air in that car in the tunnel and hadn't shifted back. "You're going to tell me something," Kaelion said. "And I need you to tell me straight." Rivian's hands settled on the wheel. "The Veltrin Donor Registry," he said. "I participated in a council-mandated alpha health assessment 8 years ago. The assessment included a genetic profile archive. Standard record for alpha signatories in the Pacific Network." He paused. The road went straight and dark ahead of them. "I was never informed the archive was connected to any reproductive program." The silence landed. Kaelion held it. Held Nico's weight. Held the window and the dark and the smell of the valley. "My security team ran a cross-reference tonight," Rivian said. "Against Veltrin's leaked data set." "How probable?" Kaelion said. "A beat. 98.7%. Kaelion didn't say anything. The road went on. Nico breathed in his lap, slow and complete, the breathing of someone who had no idea what was being said 2 feet above his sleeping head. Kaelion's voice, when it came back, was very controlled. "You're telling me my son was made with your DNA without your knowledge?" "Yes. And you didn't know?" "I didn't know," Rivian said. "Until tonight." Kaelion looked at the road. He looked at Nico. He looked at the dashboard, the instruments, the simple functional glow of a vehicle moving through the dark. He didn't cry. He'd spent too long past crying for most things. But something in his chest did the thing that happens before crying, the tightening, the pressure building in the architecture of the ribs. He breathed through it. "He's still mine," Kaelion said. Rivian's jaw moved. "He's yours," he said. And the word yours from this man, in this voice at this hour, had a quality to it that Kaelion couldn't categorize and didn't try to. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The safe house was a standard two-story outside Stockton, on a street full of houses that all looked the same, the kind of anonymity that was the best kind of hiding. Inside it was clean, stocked, and had clearly been set up by people who knew what they were doing. Food, medical supplies, 3 bedrooms, a communications room in what had been a home office. Rivian's team dealt with his wound in that room. A woman named Deja, compact and efficient, who barely looked at Kaelion while she worked and who had clearly done this before enough times that Rivian's stoicism during the process didn't register as remarkable to her. Kaelion fed Nico and put him down in the crib that had been set up in the second bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a while. He was thinking about the traitor. The Renner attack on the mountain pass had been planned before the train departed, which meant someone had fed Kaelion's route to the Renner family before he even purchased the ticket. The cash purchase, the false name, none of that had mattered because someone had already known where he was going before he got there. Which meant the breach was inside the network Dara had given him. Which meant Dara, or someone close to Dara, or someone who had gotten to Dara. He thought about the 12 days of silence and felt sick. He got up and went to the communications room. Rivian was there with his shirt changed, his side bandaged, sitting at the console with Zion, the head of security, a tall man with close-cut hair and the kind of attention in his eyes that missed nothing, going through the intercept data from the Veltron network. Kaelion stopped in the doorway. "Someone sold my route," he said. Both men looked at him. The Renner attack was prepositioned. They knew the train. They knew the pass. They knew the timing. He stepped into the room. "I was routed through a safe house network by an Omega woman named Dara Osei. She gave me the route 4 days ago. I haven't heard from her in 12 days. Zion looked at Rivian. Rivian looked at Kaelion. "Sit down," Rivian said. "I don't want to sit down. I want to know if she's alive." A beat. Zion pulled up something on the screen, turned it toward Kaelion. Kaelion looked at the screen. Dara Osei. A photograph. A date stamp from 8 days ago. A location tag for a property in Modesto. The file had a red designation at the top that Kaelion didn't need to be part of Rivian's network to understand. He sat down. He sat down and put his hands flat on the table and breathed. Dara had 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. She'd shown him pictures on a cracked phone screen while she assembled the burner phones for him, narrating which kid was which, proud the way parents are proud when they're just talking to another parent. She'd said, "You'll be okay. You're careful and you're smart and you'll be okay." She'd been wrong about herself. "She didn't sell my route," Kaelion said. "No," Zion said. "Whoever took her would have extracted it. The Renner family. Possibly. Possibly someone working across the families. The attack on the pass had resources that the Renner family alone doesn't typically deploy." Zion paused. "There's coordination happening between at least 2 of the 3 families. They've stopped competing over the child and started cooperating. Which was worse. 3 families at war meant 3 separate pursuit operations that could be played against each other. 3 families cooperating meant a single unified front with combined resources and no internal friction. Kaelion thought about the council, the 3 families, the board structure, the way power moved through organizations like this, through formal structures and formal votes, through procedures and registrations and the kind of authority that had paper attached to it. He thought about what Rivian had said about proof. He thought about what he'd said to Rivian 3 nights ago on the train. The baby is physical evidence. The only proof that exists outside the facility. He thought about the council meeting schedule he'd found in the Veltron files before he ran. Quarterly sessions. One coming up in 6 days. All 3 family heads. The full board. He looked at Rivian. "The quarterly council meeting," he said. "Is it still scheduled?" Rivian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes," he said. "Where?" Rivian studied him. Reading him the way he had on the train, the way he read everything, looking for the structure beneath the surface. "Kaelion," he said. "I want to go," Kaelion said. "I want to walk into that meeting." The room went quiet. Zion looked at Rivian. Rivian looked at Kaelion. "You're an unregistered Omega with no council standing," Zion said. "Not unkind. Just factual, the way a person is factual when the facts matter. You have no legal presence in that room. They could remove you physically in the first 60 seconds. "They won't," Kaelion said. "Why not?" "Because I'll have the baby." He paused. "And because the baby is standing proof of what they built. Every family head in that room knows what the cohort initiative was. Every one of them sanctioned it. The moment I walk in there holding Nico in front of the full board, I'm not a runaway Omega anymore. I'm the carrier of a live bioethics liability in front of witnesses." Silence. "They'll still move to contain you," Zion said. "Maybe." Kaelion turned to Rivian. "Unless someone with council standing is already in the room when I arrive." Rivian held his gaze for a long moment. "You want to use my position," he said. "I want to use the fact that Nico is your biological son, and you are a council signatory with alpha status, and they used your DNA without your consent." Kaelion held the eye contact. "They didn't just run a program on Omegas. They used an alpha on their own board. That's not just an ethics violation. That's a power violation. The kind that gets a vote called." The silence in the room had weight now. Rivian looked at the table, then at Kaelion. "Give me 4 days," he said. "For what?" "To make sure that when you walk into that room, you walk out of it." Kaelion looked at him. At the stillness and the calculation and the thing underneath both of those that had been present since the train but that neither of them had named yet. "Okay," Kaelion said. 4 days. The next 4 days were not quiet. Rivian's network moved the way a large thing moves when it's been given a direction. Not loudly, but completely, every part of it engaged. Zion ran intelligence operations from the safe house while Kaelion learned the council structure from documents that Rivian walked him through personally, evening sessions at the kitchen table, Nico between them in a bouncer seat, the baby playing with a plastic ring and ignoring the weight of what the 2 adults on either side of him were building. Kaelion learned the family names, the board positions, the internal rivalries that still existed even within the new cooperation. He learned which members were genuinely committed to the cohort program and which had simply not opposed it when it came up for funding. He learned which ones had something to lose beyond the program itself. Most importantly, he learned who was already afraid. Because fear, Rivian told him, is the fastest path to a vote. "You know this kind of thing," Kaelion said on the 3rd evening. "It wasn't a question." "I've been operating in council structures for 15 years, Rivian said. "Politics at this level isn't loud. It's patient. It's the accumulation of leverage before the moment arrives." "Is that what I am?" Kaelion said. "Leverage." Rivian looked at him across the table. The kitchen light was overhead, warm and ordinary. Nico had fallen asleep in the bouncer and his face in sleep was the face it always was, open and complete and entirely his own. "No," Rivian said. The word was simple and flat and settled and Kaelion believed it. On the 4th day, Zion found the traitor. Not Dara. Dara was gone. But the person who had extracted the route from her and sold it forward. A man named Marcus Teal who had been inside the underground safe house network for 3 years and who had been receiving payments from a Renner-affiliated account for 18 months. Zion laid the documentation on the table with the specific satisfaction of someone who is very good at their job and knows it. Kaelion looked at the file. "What happens to him?" he said. "That depends on what you want," Rivian said. Kaelion thought about Dara. Her photographs. Her cracked phone screen. "You'll be okay. Include it in the council filing," he said. "Everything. The route extraction. The payment records. The connection to the Renner family's operation. Put it in the record." Rivian nodded. It went in the record. On the 5th day, they drove to the city. The council meeting was held in a building in downtown San Francisco that looked from the outside like a private investment firm. Marble lobby. Security at the door that recognized Rivian and then went very still when they processed who was behind him. A man in a gray suit who reached for his radio and then thought better of it. They went up. The council chamber was on the 14th floor. Dark wood. Long table. 9 members around it when the elevator opened and the doors stood apart and Kaelion walked in with Nico against his chest and the full weight of everything he carried visible in the way he held himself. He had Nico. He had the documentation. He had Rivian's name on his lips and Rivian 2 steps behind him. And he had 3 weeks of running that had turned into something else. Something harder and more deliberate. The kind of purpose that gets built by necessity and then stays. 9 faces turned. The room went rigid. Kaelion stopped at the foot of the table and looked at the 9 people who had sanctioned the program that built his son, and he was very calm. "My name is Kaelion Dorsey," he said. "I worked at the Veltrin Institute for 2 years. I have the documentation of the cohort initiative, the full donor file, the active birth records, and the payment trail to every person in this room who approved the program's operational phase." Nobody spoke. "The child I'm holding," he said, "is the program's highest viability candidate. His name is Nico. He is 8 months old." He held the room's attention the way Rivian had taught him, with stillness and not with volume. "He is not your heir. He is not your property. He is mine." He paused. "If you want to discuss that," Kaelion said, "you answer to me first." The silence in the room was the kind that happens when people are calculating very fast. A man at the far end of the table. Older, gray-haired, the kind of presence that indicated he had been running things for long enough that he'd forgotten what it felt like not to, began to rise from his seat. Behind Kaelion, a voice said, "My Omega speaks for me." Rivian stepped through the doors, and every person at that table who had been calculating the fastest way to remove Kaelion from this room stopped calculating. Chapter 6. Chapter 6, What Stays When Everything Else Burns. The council chamber went so quiet that the sound of the city 14 floors below became the loudest thing in the room. Traffic. A distant horn. The ordinary continuation of the world outside this building, indifferent to what was happening inside it. Rivian Cade walked to the head of the table. He didn't take a seat. He stood at the end opposite the gray-haired man, his hands at his sides, his posture the same as it had been on the train and in the car and in the mountain dark, complete, settled. The kind of presence that doesn't need the room to adjust to it because the room already has. He looked at each person at that table in sequence. Not long, just enough to register. Just enough for each of them to understand that they had been seen and categorized and the category had been decided. Then he spoke. "My name is on your donor registry," he said. "My genetic material was used in your program without my knowledge or consent. You ran a reproductive operation using the archived sample of a sitting council signatory, and you produced a live birth and you tracked that child for 8 months while I had no knowledge he existed." His voice hadn't changed pitch or pace once. It was the same voice that had said "stay behind me" on a tilted train car. The voice that cost nothing to use and landed like structure. Whatever you built this room to protect, it does not protect you from this. The gray-haired man at the far end of the table had sat back down. His name was Aldrich Vance. Kaelion knew it now. The eldest member of the Vance family, the largest of the 3 funding families, the man whose signature appeared on the cohort initiative's original authorization document in the 2nd year of the program's active phase. Aldrich Vance looked at Rivian, then at Kaelion, then at the baby in Kaelion's arms. Something moved in his face. Not regret. Men like Aldrich Vance had not built what they built by carrying regret. But something adjacent to it, the look of someone who had made a calculation and was now sitting inside the answer and finding it less comfortable than the equation had suggested. "The program was authorized under," he began. "Sit," Rivian said it once. Vance stopped. A woman 2 seats to Vance's right, Sonia Mercer, 2nd chair of the Mercer family, who had come into her position 3 years ago, and whose signature appeared on exactly 2 documents related to the cohort initiative, both of them financial approvals, sat forward in her seat. "What are you proposing?" she said, addressing Rivian. The pragmatic voice. the voice of someone already running the survival math. "I'm not proposing," Rivian said. "I'm informing. The documentation in your Omega's possession is already with my legal archive and with 2 independent council recorders outside this building. If anyone in this room attempts to contain either him or the child, the complete file publishes to every registered council in the network within 4 hours." "Dead man's switch," Mercer said. "Standing order," Rivian said. "It doesn't require me to be dead. It requires me to send a single message to pause it. Which I will do if we reach a satisfactory resolution here." Mercer looked at Vance. Vance looked at the table. Around the room, the 8 other members of the board were doing their own calculations, the specific internal arithmetic of people who are deciding how much of what they built is worth defending and how much of it needs to be cut loose immediately. Kaelion stood at the foot of the table and held Nico and watched. He had done what he came to do, said what he came to say. Now he watched Rivian work the room the way Rivian had been working rooms like this for 15 years, and he understood why the man had asked for 4 days and why those 4 days had mattered. This wasn't an ambush. It was a board meeting that had been prepared more thoroughly than the board knew. Every alliance shift, every existing division, every person in that room who had a reason to want the cohort program buried rather than exposed.